By the time my divorce began, my husband had already decided I would take the fall for his murder case. I sat at the defendant's table, not the plaintiff's, while my husband of 12 years smiled from across the aisle like he'd already won. The mediator shuffled papers between us, her expression carefully neutral, but I could see it in her eyes. She'd already decided who to believe. Dorian looked perfect. Charcoal suit, silk tie, hair graying at the temples in that distinguished way that made strangers trust him instantly. He dressed for this moment like an actor preparing for opening night. And me, I wore the same black blazer I'd worn to my mother's funeral 3 years ago, because it was the only thing in my closet that still looked professional. My hands were shaking so badly I had to keep them folded in my lap. "Mrs. Castellano," the mediator said, not unkindly, "do you understand the severity of the accusations being presented today?" I understood. God, did I understand. My soon-to-be ex-husband had just accused me of being complicit in a murder that happened 7 years ago. A murder I didn't even know had been a murder until 3 weeks ago when the police showed up at my door with a warrant and questions I couldn't answer. If you're already feeling the weight of this story, I'd be grateful if you'd take a moment to like and subscribe. Stories like these don't get told often enough, and your support helps ensure they reach the people who need to hear them. Thank you for being here. Let me back up. Dorian and I met in college. He was studying business administration. I was getting my degree in education, dreaming of teaching high school literature. He was charming in that effortless way that made everyone in the room turn toward him when he spoke. I was quieter, steadier. We balanced each other, or so I thought. We married young, 23. Everyone said we were rushing, but we didn't listen. For the first few years, things were good. He built a career in commercial real estate development. I taught English at a private school across town. We bought a house in the suburbs. We talked about children. But somewhere around year 7, Dorian started changing. Late nights at the office became standard. Business trips stretched longer. He grew irritable when I asked questions, distant when I tried to connect. I convinced myself it was stress. The economy was unstable. His firm was struggling. Everyone goes through rough patches in marriage, right? Then, 2 years ago, everything shifted. Dorian's company landed a massive development contract, a luxury residential complex downtown, the kind of project that could make or break a career. He became obsessed, worked 18-hour days, stopped coming to bed at normal hours. When I'd wake at 3 in the morning and find him still in his study, staring at his laptop with this haunted expression, he'd tell me he was fine. Just tired. I should have known something was wrong. But I was teaching, grading papers, attending faculty meetings, living my own life parallel to his. We existed in the same house but barely intersected. By the time I realized how far apart we drifted, it felt too late to bridge the gap. 6 months ago, Dorian told me he wanted a divorce. He said it over breakfast, calmly, like he was discussing the weather. "This isn't working anymore, Vivian. We both know it." I remember the coffee cup in my hand, how the ceramic felt warm against my palm, how I couldn't seem to form words. "Is there someone else?" I finally asked. "No," he said. "I just need to move forward." I didn't fight him. Maybe I should have. But the truth was I was exhausted. Exhausted from trying to reach someone who'd already left. So I hired a lawyer. We started dividing assets. It was supposed to be amicable, clean. Then came the knock on my door. 2 detectives, a man and a woman, both wearing that practiced expression of professional concern. "Mrs. Castellano, we need to ask you some questions about Tobias Merrick." The name meant nothing to me. Who? Tobias Merrick. He was a city inspector who worked with your husband's development firm. He died 7 years ago. I invited them in because that's what innocent people do. I made tea. I didn't drink while they asked me about timelines and locations and conversations I couldn't remember having. Tobias Merrick, they explained, had been found dead in his apartment 7 years ago. The official ruling was suicide. He'd allegedly overdosed on sleeping pills and alcohol. But new evidence had emerged. Evidence suggesting his death wasn't self-inflicted. "What does this have to do with me?" I asked. The female detective glanced at her partner. "Your husband has provided testimony suggesting you had knowledge of Mr. Merrick's death. He's indicated that you may have been involved in covering up certain irregularities." The room tilted. "That's impossible," I said. "I didn't even know the man." "According to Mr. Castellano's statement, you were aware that Mr. Merrick was pressuring your husband over permit violations on the downtown development project. He claims you were present during conversations about how to handle the situation." "No," I said. "That never happened. But they had documents. bank records showing unusual withdrawals from our joint account during that period, emails sent from my personal address, emails I had no memory of writing, discussing the need to resolve the Merrick problem quietly, phone records showing calls between my cell and Merrick's number in the weeks before his death. I stared at the evidence spread across my kitchen table and felt my life crumbling. I didn't send those emails, I whispered. I didn't make those calls. The detectives exchanged another look. The kind of look that said they'd heard this before. From guilty people. Mrs. Castellano, we recommend you contact your attorney. The divorce mediation happened 2 weeks after that interrogation. My lawyer, Edmund, tried to have it postponed, but the judge denied the motion. Dorian's legal team argued that the criminal investigation was separate from our marital dissolution. The divorce proceedings would continue on schedule. So there I sat, across from the man I'd once loved, while he systematically destroyed everything I'd built. The mediator asked about asset division. Dorian's lawyer presented documentation showing that I'd been emotionally unstable during our marriage, that I'd made concerning statements about his business associates, that I'd exhibited erratic behavior, requiring medical attention, something about anxiety medication I'd taken briefly after my mother died. Every word felt like a blade. My lawyer objected, argued, but Dorian had prepared for this. He had documentation for everything. Dates, times, witnesses. And regarding custody of any future proceedings, Dorian's attorney said smoothly, my client believes Mrs. Castellano's current legal situation makes her an unsuitable candidate for... We don't have children, I interrupted. The attorney smiled. Not yet. But given the criminal allegations, my client wants to ensure protective measures are in place should. This is about destroying me, I said quietly, not protecting anyone. Dorian finally spoke. His voice was soft, wounded. Vivian, I'm trying to do what's right. I know you're scared. I know you're angry. But running from this won't help either of us. The way he said it, so reasonable, so concerned, that's when I understood. This wasn't about divorce. This wasn't even about money or property or starting fresh. This was about making sure I couldn't fight back. The days following that mediation blurred together in a haze of legal consultations and police interviews. Edmund assured me we'd contest the allegations, build a defense, but his confidence felt hollow. The problem, he admitted during one particularly bleak meeting, is that the evidence looks coordinated. Someone with access to your accounts and devices constructed a very convincing paper trail. Dorian, I said, possibly, but proving it is another matter. I stopped sleeping properly, stopped eating regular meals. My principal at the school called me in for a concerned conversation about my performance. Parents were asking questions. The school board wanted assurances. I took a voluntary leave of absence. My friends, the ones who hadn't already distanced themselves, sent careful text messages. How are you holding up? Is there anything we can do? We're here if you need to talk. But they weren't. Not really. I could hear the hesitation in their voices during the rare phone calls. The unspoken question, did you actually do it? Even my sister, Charlotte, who'd always been my fiercest advocate, seemed uncertain. I believe you, she said during one visit. But, Viv, some of this evidence is really damning. Are you absolutely sure there's nothing you're forgetting? Maybe something that seemed innocent at the time, but... I'm not forgetting anything, I said, because none of it happened. She looked at me with pity. That was worse than doubt. Isolation is strange. It happens slowly, one person at a time stepping back, creating distance, until you look around and realize you're standing alone in a space that used to be crowded with support. I spent most of my time in the house. Our house, the one Dorian and I had picked out together. He'd already moved into a downtown apartment, but I could feel his presence everywhere. In the furniture we'd chosen, the paint colors we'd debated, the life we'd constructed. Late one night, unable to sleep, I started going through old boxes in the basement. Tax documents, receipts, the accumulated debris of 12 years together. That's when I found the folder. It was tucked inside a larger box labeled Business Documents 2016 to 2018. Nothing remarkable. Just a plain manila folder containing what looked like old contracts and permits for Dorian's development projects. But one document caught my attention. It was a permit application for the downtown luxury complex, the one that had made Dorian's career. And there, in the approval signatures section, was a name, Tobias Merrick, city building inspector. I pulled out my laptop and started searching. Tobias Merrick had indeed been a city inspector. According to archived news articles, he'd been found dead in his apartment on March 14th, 7 years ago. Initial ruling, suicide. The articles mentioned he'd been under investigation for allegedly accepting bribes from developers seeking permit approvals. I kept reading. One article, buried in a local business journal, mentioned that Merrick had been preparing to testify against several development firms suspected of building code violations. The article was dated 2 weeks before his death. I pulled out the timeline the detectives had given me. Cross-reference dates. Merrick's death occurred exactly 3 days after the final permits were approved for Dorian's downtown project. The same project that had launched my husband's career into the stratosphere. My hand started shaking again. But this time it wasn't fear. It was clarity. I spent the next week buried in research. Not the frantic, desperate research of someone trying to prove their innocence, but the methodical investigation of someone putting together a puzzle. I pulled every document I could find related to Dorian's business dealings during that time period. Bank statements, credit card receipts, calendar entries. I created a timeline on my laptop, noting every meeting, every transaction, every trip. Patterns started emerging. 3 large cash withdrawals from our joint account in the month before Merrick's death. I'd assumed they were for business expenses. Dorian often dealt in cash for certain vendor payments. But the amounts were significant. $5,000, $7,000, $10,000. The emails sent from my account, the ones the police claimed I'd written, were all sent during hours when I'd been at work. I pulled my old teaching schedules, cross-referenced them with the email timestamps. Every single one was sent between 10 a.m. and 3 p.m. on weekdays. When I was in a classroom, with witnesses, the phone calls to Merrick's number, I requested detailed records from our carrier. The calls were short, under a minute each, and they'd all been made from locations near Dorian's office, not near my school. Someone had made those calls using my phone, or spoofed my number. I thought about Dorian's technical skills, how he'd always been the one to set up our home network, update our devices. Let me handle the technology, Viv, he'd always said. You focus on your students. If you're following this story and feeling that sick recognition of how carefully someone can manipulate the people closest to them, please consider liking this video. These stories need to be told, and your engagement helps them reach others who might need to hear them. I needed proof. Not suspicions, not theories, but solid proof. So I did something I'd never done before. I hired a private investigator. His name was Leonard, former police detective, retired early after a back injury. He listened to my story without interruption, taking notes on a yellow legal pad. You understand this won't be cheap, he said when I finished. I understand. And there's no guarantee I'll find anything useful. I understand that too. He studied me for a moment. Why come to me? Why not let your lawyer handle the investigation? Because my lawyer thinks I'm guilty, I said. He's just too professional to say it out loud. Leonard nodded slowly. I'll need access to everything you have. Documents, passwords, timeline of your movements during the relevant period. I gave him everything. 3 weeks passed. I attended another divorce hearing. Another round of barely disguised accusations. Dorian's lawyer presented more evidence of my unstable behavior. A journal entry I'd written about feeling frustrated with Dorian's long work hours. A text message to Charlotte where I'd joked about poisoning his coffee after a particularly bad argument. Jokes taken out of context become confessions when framed correctly. The judge looked at me with something between concern and suspicion. My lawyer argued weakly about circumstantial evidence and reasonable doubt. But I could see we were losing ground. That evening, Leonard called. I found something, he said. Can you meet tomorrow? His office was small, cluttered, walls covered with filing cabinets and cork boards pinned with old case notes. Leonard cleared a space on his desk and opened a laptop. I started with the emails, he said. The ones allegedly sent from your account. You were right. The timestamps coincide with your teaching schedule. But there's more. He turned the screen toward me, showed me metadata I didn't understand. These emails weren't sent from your computer or phone. They were sent from an IP address registered to your husband's office building. Someone logged into your email account from his workplace and sent those messages. My heart was pounding. Can you prove it was him? Not definitively, but I pulled security footage from the building for those dates. He opened another window. Grainy video of an office corridor. Look at the timestamp. This is March 2nd, 10:43 a.m. One of the emails was sent at 10:44. I watched as a figure walked down the corridor toward an office at the end. Even in the poor quality footage, I recognized the gait. The posture. Dorian. He's the only one in that wing of the building during the relevant times for all 4 emails, Leonard said. And look at this. He showed me phone records. The calls to Merrick's number. These calls were made using a voice-over IP service that spoofs caller ID. The service was paid for using a credit card registered to your husband's name. A business account. I couldn't speak. There's more, Leonard continued. I tracked down someone who worked with Merrick at the city building department. Former colleague named Patricia Huang. She's retired now, but she remembered Merrick. Said he was planning to blow the whistle on several developers who'd been cutting corners on safety inspections. Including Dorian's project? Especially Dorian's project. According to Patricia, Merrick had documented violations that would have shut down the entire development. He scheduled a meeting with city prosecutors for March 15th, 2 days after he died. Yes, Leonard pulled out another document, a financial record. This is a bank transfer from an offshore account. 10 days before Merrick's death, $50,000 was moved from this account to an untraceable recipient. The account was opened by your husband using falsified documents. How did you? I have contacts, Leonard said simply. People who owe me favors. The point is, this money moved right before Merrick died. And based on the pattern of your husband's other financial dealings, I believe he was paying someone to handle the situation. Handle it how? Leonard's expression was grave. Tobias Merrick didn't kill himself, Mrs. Castellano. The original investigation was sloppy, underfunded. The coroner's office marked it as suicide because there was no obvious evidence of foul play, and Merrick had been depressed about the bribery allegations. But the top screen showed inconsistencies. The amount of drugs in his system was precisely calibrated to stop his heart while mimicking an overdose. That takes expertise. I felt sick. Your husband orchestrated Merrick's death to protect his development project, Leonard said. And now he's framing you for it to ensure you can't expose him during the divorce. I sat in my car outside Leonard's office for 20 minutes, trying to process everything. Dorian had killed someone, or had someone killed, to protect his career. And now he was destroying mine to protect himself. The calculation of it was breathtaking. The patience, the planning. He'd spent months, maybe years, laying the groundwork for this moment. Accessing my accounts, sending those emails, making those calls, building a narrative where I was the unstable, desperate wife who'd helped him cover up a crime. And it had almost worked. I drove home in the dark, parked in the driveway, sat staring at the house we'd shared. All those years, I thought I knew him, thought we were partners, but I'd been living with a stranger who saw me as nothing more than a convenient scapegoat. The rage came slowly, then all at once. I wasn't going to let him win. The next divorce hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks out. That gave me time. I met with Edmund, my lawyer, and laid everything out. Every piece of evidence Leonard had gathered, the metadata, the security footage, the financial records, the witness testimony. Edmund's expression shifted as I talked, from skepticism to shock to something that looked like actual hope. This changes everything, he said. We need to take this to the prosecutor immediately. No, I said. He blinked. What? If we go to the prosecutor now, Dorian will know we have this information. He'll disappear. Lawyer up. Tie this in legal knots for years. I want him to think he's winning right up until the moment he loses. Edmund looked uncomfortable. Vivian, I understand the desire for dramatic justice, but legally speaking, can we submit this evidence during the divorce hearing? Technically, yes. Since the criminal allegations are being used as grounds for the divorce settlement, we can introduce evidence that contradicts those allegations. But then that's what we do. Edmund studied me. You've changed. I had. The woman who'd sat in that first mediation, shaking and terrified, was gone. In her place was someone who understood exactly how much power she'd been giving away. The final divorce hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning. I dressed carefully, professional but not performative. I wanted to look like myself, not like someone trying to play a role. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Just a handful of people. The judge, court reporter, both legal teams, and a few observers in the gallery. Dorian sat with his lawyers, that same calm confidence radiating from him. He glanced at me once, smiled slightly, like he felt sorry for me. The judge called the session to order. Dorian's attorney started with a summary of their position. I was emotionally unstable, criminally complicit, a liability my husband needed protection from. They presented their evidence again. The emails, the calls, the bank withdrawals. My client has been devastated by his wife's actions, the attorney said. He came forward with this information out of a sense of moral obligation, despite the personal cost. He simply wants to move forward with his life while ensuring Mrs. Castellano receives the help she clearly needs. The performance was masterful. Dorian even managed to look wounded when the attorney mentioned the betrayal of trust. Then it was our turn. Edmund stood slowly, opened his briefcase. Your Honor, we'd like to present new evidence that directly contradicts the allegations made against Mrs. Castellano. Dorian's lawyer frowned. Your Honor, we weren't notified of any new evidence. The evidence relates directly to claims made by opposing counsel during these proceedings, Edmund said. We're within our rights to present it. The judge nodded. Proceed. Edmund began methodically laying out what Leonard had found. The email metadata, the security footage, the phone records. Each piece of evidence was presented calmly, factually, without dramatics. I watched Dorian's face. At first, he maintained his composure. But as Edmund continued, something shifted. His jaw tightened. His hands, resting on the table, curled into fists. Furthermore, Edmund said, we have testimony from Patricia Huang, former city employee, regarding threats made against Tobias Merrick in the weeks before his death. Ms. Huang specifically recalls Mr. Merrick mentioning pressure from Castellano Development Group. He presented more documents, financial records showing the offshore transfer, bank statements proving Dorian had sole access to the accounts used for suspicious transactions. Your Honor, the evidence clearly shows that Mr. Castellano fabricated these accusations against his wife to deflect from his own criminal activity. Every piece of supposed evidence against Mrs. Castellano was created by Mr. Castellano himself, using access he had to her personal accounts. The courtroom was silent. If this story is resonating with you, if you've ever felt the ground shift beneath you when you realized someone you trusted was working against you, please consider subscribing to this channel. Stories like this one deserve to be heard, and your support makes that possible. The judge looked at Dorian. Mr. Castellano, do you have a response to these allegations? Dorian stood. His lawyer tried to put a hand on his arm, but he shook it off. This is absurd, he said. His voice was steady, but I could hear the edge underneath. My wife has clearly spent weeks constructing an elaborate conspiracy theory to avoid taking responsibility for. The metadata doesn't lie, Mr. Castellano, the judge interrupted. According to these records, emails allegedly sent by your wife originated from your office building at times when she was verifiably elsewhere. IP addresses can be spoofed by someone with technical knowledge and access to the accounts in question. Someone like yourself. Dorian's composure cracked. Just slightly. Your Honor, you're taking the word of a private investigator over police evidence. I'm examining evidence that contradicts the police narrative, the judge said. Evidence that suggests the police investigation may have been compromised by false information provided by the complainant. She turned to the court officer. Bailiff, please contact the district attorney's office. I want prosecutors in this courtroom within the hour. Dorian went pale. His lawyer stood quickly. Your Honor, my client is happy to cooperate with any investigation, but we request. Your client can make requests from the detention center, the judge said. I'm remanding Mr. Castellano to custody pending a full investigation into the allegations surrounding Tobias Merrick's death. The courtroom erupted in motion. The bailiff approached Dorian. His lawyers were arguing procedures and rights and protocols, but it was noise. Background static. Dorian looked at me across the courtroom. For the first time, he looked scared. Vivian, he said, please, we can work this out. You don't understand what you're doing. I understand perfectly, I said quietly. You tried to destroy me because you thought I was too weak to fight back. You were wrong. The days following that hearing blurred together again, but in a different way. This time, the chaos was progress. Motion forward instead of spiraling down. The district attorney's office opened a full investigation into Tobias Merrick's death. Leonard's evidence was turned over to homicide detectives. New forensic analysis was ordered on Merrick's autopsy report. Within a week, they traced the offshore financial transfers to a man named Victor Reyes, a former paramedic who'd lost his medical license after being caught selling prescription medications. Reyes had specialized knowledge of how to administer a lethal cocktail of drugs that would mimic a suicide. Under pressure from prosecutors, Reyes eventually confessed. Dorian had paid him $50,000 to kill Merrick and stage it as an overdose. The plan was simple. Reyes would introduce himself as a friend of a friend, gain Merrick's trust, and slip the drugs into his drink during a social visit. It had worked perfectly. Until now. Dorian was formally charged with conspiracy to commit murder and obstruction of justice. His bail was set at $2 million. His father, a retired judge, paid it immediately. But the damage was done. The man who'd built his career on charm and confidence was now front-page news for the worst possible reasons. His development company issued a statement distancing themselves from him. Business partners quietly severed ties. The luxury complex he'd built, the one that had cost Tobias Merrick his life, became a symbol of corruption. As for the divorce, it was finalized quietly. No more hearings. No more accusations. Edmund negotiated a settlement heavily weighted in my favor. Dorian's lawyers didn't fight. They couldn't. Their client's criminal liability made any further attempts to discredit me professional suicide. I kept the house, received a substantial financial settlement, and most importantly, I received something no court could quantify, my life back. The trial took place 8 months later. I attended every day, sat in the gallery, and watched as prosecutors dismantled the man I'd once loved. They presented Leonard's evidence. Patricia Huang testified about Merrick's fears in the days before his death. Victor Reyes, having made a deal with prosecutors, described in chilling detail how he'd planned and executed the murder. Dorian's defense argued that the evidence was circumstantial, that the prosecutors were building a case on the testimony of criminals and jilted ex-spouses. That reasonable doubt existed. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Guilty on all counts. I watched Dorian's face when the verdict was read. He didn't look at me, didn't look at anyone. He just stared straight ahead, his expression blank. The judge sentenced him to 25 years to life. People ask me sometimes how I feel about everything that happened. If I'm angry, if I want more revenge, if I celebrate Dorian's imprisonment. The truth is more complicated. I'm not angry anymore. Anger requires energy, and I spent all of mine just surviving. What I feel now is something quieter. Sadness, maybe. Not for Dorian, but for the life I thought I had. The partnership I believed in. The person I thought I married. All of it was an illusion. A performance by someone who saw me as a tool to be used and discarded when convenient. But here's what I learned. Silence isn't the same as weakness. Patience isn't the same as passivity. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to accept the narrative someone else writes for your life. Dorian thought he could control the story, thought he could paint me as the villain while he walked away clean. He underestimated how much a person can endure when they know they're fighting for truth. I went back to teaching last fall. The school welcomed me back carefully, watching to see if I was the same person who'd left. I'm not, of course, but that's not necessarily bad. My students ask good questions now, and I give them better answers. We read novels about morally complicated characters, discuss the difference between justice and revenge, talk about how power corrupts when left unchecked. Charlotte visits regularly. We're rebuilding our relationship slowly. She apologized for doubting me. I told her I understood. Doubt is natural when someone you trust presents convincing lies. Edmund retired last year. Sent me a card saying I was the most memorable client of his career. I took it as a compliment. Leonard still does investigative work. We meet for coffee sometimes. He never charges me for his time. Says helping expose Dorian was payment enough. And Dorian? He's serving his sentence at a medium security facility upstate. I've never visited, never written. I have nothing left to say to him. Sometimes I wonder if he thinks about what he threw away. The life we could have had if he'd made different choices. If greed and fear hadn't consumed him. But mostly, I don't think about him at all. Before I close this story, I want to say thank you for listening, for staying with me through every difficult moment. If this story touched you or made you think, I'd be grateful if you'd like and subscribe. Your engagement helps ensure stories like mine continue to reach people who need them. There's a strange freedom that comes from surviving something designed to destroy you. You realize you're stronger than you knew, more capable than anyone, including yourself, believed. Dorian tried to erase me, tried to make me the villain in a story he'd carefully constructed. But stories have a way of revealing truth, even when someone tries desperately to bury it. The truth is, I survived. Not through vengeance or violence, but through patience and persistence. Through refusing to accept his version of events. Through trusting that facts, eventually, speak louder than lies. And that's the lesson I carry now. The one I share with students who come to me struggling with their own battles. Your silence is not consent. Your patience is not weakness. And the story someone else tells about you doesn't become true just because they tell it convincingly. You get to write your own ending. Sometimes it takes longer than you want. Sometimes the path is darker than you imagined. But the pen is in your hand, not theirs. If you know someone who might benefit from hearing this story, someone going through a divorce, dealing with betrayal, or fighting to prove their innocence against impossible odds, please share this with them. Sometimes knowing you're not alone makes all the difference. I'm Vivian Castellano, and this is the story of how my husband tried to ruin me in the divorce by framing me for his crime, and how I refused to let him win. Thank you for listening.